I was just trying to surprise you by cleaning your car. My name's Richard Bennett. I'm 48. Been running my landscaping business in Boise for 12 years. Built it from nothing after the factory closed. I fix lawns, trim hedges, and apparently I find things my wife wishes I hadn't. Molly looked up from her phone with that expression she got when she felt cornered. You didn't need to do that. I was going to take it to the car wash this weekend. She'd been saying that for 3 weeks, but that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the small tube I'd found wedged under her passenger seat. Clear plastic with a blue cap, personal lubricant, water-based warming formula, not a brand I recognized and definitely not something we owned. I hadn't mentioned it to her, hadn't even brought it in the house, just left it exactly where I found it and came inside to watch my wife lie to my face about car washes she had no intention of getting. For months, something had felt wrong. Molly worked late more often. Her phone stayed face down during dinner. She started buying expensive workout clothes but never seemed to sweat in them. When I asked about her day, she gave me the same tired responses. Fine, busy. You know how it is. I knew how it used to be. We used to talk about everything. The business, her classes, weekend plans. Now, she barely managed complete sentences unless she needed something from me. Last Tuesday, she came home at 11 p.m. claiming she'd been at a staff meeting. I called the community center the next day asking about their hours. They closed at 9 o'clock p.m. sharp. When I mentioned this to Molly, she said I must have misunderstood, said they had a special late meeting about budget cuts. But there was something else that made my stomach twist. 2 weeks ago, I'd been working in the Hendersons' yard across town when I saw Molly's blue SUV parked outside the CrossFit gym. On Fairview. She'd never mentioned joining a gym. When I asked her about it that night, she looked confused and said she'd been grocery shopping at that time. I didn't push it. I never pushed anything with Molly. I'd learned over our 15 years together that she hated confrontation, but I also learned that she was a terrible liar when she was nervous. Thanks for cleaning it, she said, but her voice had that edge it got when she felt like I was watching her too closely. Found some interesting things under the seats, I said, opening the refrigerator to grab a beer. She went back to her phone without responding, but I saw her delete whatever message she'd been typing. That small tube was still out there, waiting under her passenger seat like a loaded gun. I met Molly at a barbecue in 2010. She was 25, fresh out of college with a degree in exercise science and dreams of opening her own studio. I was 33, still working at the lumber mill, trying to save enough to start my own business. She laughed at my jokes and didn't mind that I had sawdust under my fingernails. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at her parents' church. Nothing fancy, but it felt right. Molly supported me when I quit the mill to start Bennett Landscaping. She worked double shifts at the gym to help cover our bills during those first lean years. When I landed my first big commercial contract, she cried with relief. For a long time, we were a team. She'd help me plan routes, answer client calls when I was on a job site. I'd drive her to work when her car was acting up, pick her up after late classes. We talked about having kids someday, maybe buying a bigger house. Normal dreams for normal people. But somewhere along the way, we started living parallel lives instead of a shared one. I blamed it on work at first. Landscaping is seasonal, and the busy months meant 14-hour days for me. Molly's schedule at the community center kept expanding too. More classes, more responsibilities, more time away from home. The changes started small. She stopped asking about my day. I stopped sharing job stories over dinner. We watched television in the same room but barely spoke. When we did talk, it felt polite, careful, like we were roommates who didn't want to upset the arrangement. Then came the new wardrobe, expensive leggings, sports bras that cost more than my work boots. She said the community center was encouraging staff to project a professional fitness image. She started going to what she called networking events on weekends. Industry stuff, she said, professional development. I wanted to believe her. It was easier than admitting what I was starting to suspect. But suspicion has a way of growing when you feed it with little observations, like how she showered immediately after coming home from work, how she started keeping her phone with her even when she went to the bathroom, how she never seemed interested in spending time together anymore. Weeks ago, I'd driven past the community center on a Saturday afternoon and seen her car in the parking lot. She told me she was shopping with her sister in Nampa. When I mentioned seeing her car, she said she'd stop by work to pick up something she forgot. But her sister later mentioned how nice lunch in Nampa had been. Small lies, constantly shifting stories, the kind of inconsistencies that pile up until you can't ignore them anymore. And now there was that tube, Physical evidence that my wife was doing things with someone else, things we hadn't done in months. I still loved my wife, but I was starting to realize I didn't know her anymore. Sunday afternoon, while Molly visited her mother, I went back to our SUV. Told myself I was just finishing the detail job. But really I needed to see that tube again, needed to confirm I hadn't imagined it. It was still there, wedged under the passenger seat, exactly where I'd found it. I pulled it out and sat in the driver's seat, turning it over in my hands. The label was clear. Personal lubricant, warming formula, extra long lasting, not something you buy by accident, not something you keep in your car unless you're planning to use it. Molly and I hadn't been intimate in 4 months. She was always too tired, too stressed, or not feeling well. I'd stopped trying to initiate anything because the rejection hurt too much. She'd made me feel like I was pestering her, like physical intimacy was just another chore she didn't have energy for, but apparently she had energy for someone else. I didn't get angry. That surprised me. I expected to feel rage, betrayal, the hot rush of 15 years crashing down. Instead, I felt calm, unnaturally calm, like a switch had been flipped, and suddenly, everything made perfect sense. The late nights, the new clothes, the constant phone checking, the lies about where she'd been and who she'd been with, all of it crystallized into one clear picture. My wife was having an affair. Sunday afternoon, while Molly visited her mother, I went back to her SUV. Told myself I was just finishing the detail job. But really, I needed to see that tube again. Needed to confirm I hadn't imagined it. It was still there, wedged under the passenger seat, exactly where I'd found it. I pulled it out and sat in the driver's seat, turning it over in my hands. The label was clear. Personal lubricant, warming formula, extra long-lasting, not something you buy by accident, not something you keep in your car unless you're planning to use it. Molly and I hadn't been intimate in 4 months. She was always too tired, too stressed, or not feeling well. I'd stopped trying to initiate anything because the rejection hurt too much. She'd made me feel like I was pestering her, like physical intimacy was just another chore she didn't have energy for. But apparently, she had energy for someone else. I didn't get angry. That surprised me. I expected to feel rage, betrayal, the hot rush of 15 years crashing down. Instead, I felt calm, unnaturally calm, like a switch had been flipped. And suddenly, everything made perfect sense. The late nights, the new clothes, the constant phone checking, the lies about where she'd been and who she'd been with. All of it crystallized into one clear picture. My wife was having an affair. The next week, I watched her more closely. Not in an obvious way, just paying attention. She'd grab her keys and say she was running errands, but her purse stayed behind. She always used to take it, couldn't go anywhere without her wallet. Now she left it sitting on the counter like she didn't want me to notice something inside. She'd shower before work sometimes, even when she wasn't teaching a class until the afternoon. She bought new perfume, a scent I'd never smelled before, musky and floral. One night, she left her phone unattended for the first time in weeks. It buzzed twice while she was in the shower. I glanced at the screen. No name, just a number, but the preview showed enough. Can't wait to see you again. My chest tightened, but my hand stayed steady. I didn't open the message, didn't scroll, didn't snoop. I didn't need to. I already knew. The night after I saw that message, Molly came home late again. She smelled faintly of that same perfume, mixed with sweat and something else I couldn't quite place. She dropped her gym bag by the door, kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal, and went straight upstairs to shower. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty beer in my hand, listening to the water running above me. When she came back down, her hair damp and pulled into a messy bun, she smiled at me like she used to years ago. "You okay?" she asked, casual, like nothing was wrong. I nodded, forcing a smile back. She sat across from me, scrolling her phone under the table. I caught the glow lighting up her face, the corners of her lips twitching like she was suppressing a grin. I wanted to ask her, to just put it all out there. The tube, the lies, the text message. But the words wouldn't come. 15 years of marriage doesn't just collapse in one conversation. Instead, I swallowed my questions and told her I'd be working early the next day. She nodded, distracted, already lost in whatever conversation she was having on her screen. That night I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. Molly shifted in her sleep, turning her back to me, the way she always did now. I remembered when she used to fall asleep with her head on my chest, her hand resting on my ribs like she needed to feel my heartbeat. I remembered when we used to whisper about the future in the dark, planning trips we never took, kids we never had. Now the only sound in the room was her steady breathing and the occasional buzz of her phone lighting up the nightstand. The next morning I left for work before sunrise. I parked my truck 2 blocks away from the house and waited. At 9 a.m., Molly came out dressed in those expensive workout clothes, her hair perfect, makeup done. She got into her SUV and drove off. I followed. She didn't go to the community center. She didn't go to the grocery store. She didn't even head toward the CrossFit gym where I'd seen her car before. Instead, she drove across town to a small hotel near the interstate. She parked around the side, slipped inside through a side entrance, and disappeared. I sat in my truck for an hour, 2 hours, watching the cars come and go. Around noon, she came back out, hair a mess now, lipstick smeared. She climbed into her SUV, checked her phone, and drove off like nothing had happened. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought it might snap. But still, no anger. Just that same eerie calm, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. That night, Molly came home smiling, not at me, at her phone. She set her bag down, microwaved leftovers, and asked if I'd remembered to call the accountant about our taxes. Ordinary questions, everyday routine. She didn't notice the way I studied her, the way my silence stretched. I thought about confronting her right then. I imagined slamming the tube of lubricant down on the counter, demanding the truth, watching her stammer and deny until she couldn't anymore. But something held me back. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was strategy. Maybe I needed to be absolutely sure before I blew our marriage apart. Over the next week, I started keeping a notebook. Times she left, excuses she gave, places she claimed to be. Every inconsistency I wrote down, line after line, until the pages looked like evidence in a trial. And in a way, that's what it felt like. I was building a case. One Thursday evening, she told me she had another, or late meeting at the community center. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her drive away. 10 minutes later, I was in my truck, tailing her at a distance. She didn't go to the center. She went straight back to the same hotel by the interstate. This time, she stayed 3 hours. When she finally came out, she wasn't alone. A tall man in a gray hoodie walked with her to her SUV. He leaned down, kissed her, his hand brushing her waist like he'd done it 100 times before. My wife laughed, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years. She kissed him back, quick but sure, before sliding into her car. I sat frozen. My chest didn't heave. My eyes didn't sting. It was like watching the final piece of a puzzle click into place. The faceless suspicion I'd been living with finally had a body, a man, flesh and blood, proof. She drove home like nothing had happened. She walked through our front door and hugged me like she hadn't been touching another man an hour earlier. She asked about dinner, about the schedule for the weekend. She poured herself a glass of wine, curled up on the couch, and watched television with me like our life was intact. And I played along, because now I wasn't guessing. I wasn't doubting. I knew.